Hopefully by now, creating the template files and the various template parts is starting to make a little bit more sense. What we'll be working on now is how we can create a new template to use on different pages. Before we get into building the template though, I did want to explain the template hierarchy overview. The WordPress template hierarchy is the system that WordPress uses to determine which template files to use when displaying a page on your website. It always follows a specific order, falling back through a series of files until it finds one that exists within your theme. The basic flow is that when someone visits your website, WordPress looks at what type of content is being requested. Is it a single post, an archive page, or a 404? Then it's going to check to see whether a more specific template exists. And if not, it will use more general templates as a fallback. Here's a table that shows the key templates top to bottom in priority. So for instance, the home template is going to be in charge of your posts page. WordPress is going to first look for home.html, and if that's not available, it'll use index.html. The front page, which is a static page, is going to look for the template called frontpage.html. If that's not available, it will look for page.html, and then finally, it will use index.html. As you can see on this chart, all of the pages end using index. So index is our fallback, which is why we needed it on our website. But what we'll be doing here is we're going to go ahead and create a single post page so that we can control how our posts look. WordPress has this handy graph that breaks down all of the template types and shows you the hierarchy in which template files will override others. This may be a little bit hard to see in the video, so if you want to check it out more in detail, you can use this URL. Now that we understand a little bit how the template files work, let's go ahead and create the single post template file so that we can style our post pages. Let's take a look at how we can go ahead and create this single post template. I wanted to point out that in my post area, I've created several posts just so I have some example content. Currently on our website, these posts aren't really showing. One of them shows under experiences. This isn't showing all of them because I haven't set up my query loop or my post homepage. Let's not worry about that right now. If I go ahead and open up one of these posts, you can see that the formatting looks okay inside of WordPress, but if I open the post in the front end, the formatting is a little bit wonky. Currently, it's inheriting the formatting from our index.html template because that is the only template that exists in our web project. What we're going to be doing now is we're going to be creating a new template file to go ahead and dictate how our single post pages are going to function. On this page, I obviously want to adjust the line width of the page content and make it fit in the center portion of the page. And we're also going to be adding a sidebar to this section of our website so you can see how this works. Let's jump into our code editor. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a new template part. So I'll create new file and I'm going to name this sidebar.html. In order to define a sidebar section, we'll add a mixture of the WordPress blocks and straight HTML. I'll begin by adding a WP group block. This, of course, allows us just to wrap and group other blocks together. We're going to be using the default layout, which means that no special layout rules like flex or grid are going to be applied. We often use WP group to create reusable sections like headers, footers, or sidebars. Inside of this element, I'm going to create a div. We'll assign this to have a class of WP block group and a class of sidebar. This is going to be the rendered HTML of the group block. We need to be using the WP block group so that WordPress can apply its built-in styles to this element. And I've added a custom class of sidebar so that I can easily target this with my own CSS. Inside of the div, we're going to be using something called WP heading. WP heading is how we add a heading block. And I'm going to pass in key value pairs of level 3. This is identifying this area as utilizing an H3 element. We'll just have the text say learn more. After our heading element, we're going to go ahead and create a search block. We do that by typing WP search, and this is going to self-close. It doesn't wrap around anything. This will just add a search form block that will allow users to search through our site. After the search bar, I'll have the latest posts display. So I'm going to use a WP latest dash posts. We're going to open our curly braces and we are going to add the key of display post date. And then we'll use colon and we're going to set this to be true. Since true is a Boolean, I do not need to enclose this inside of the quotes. This will insert a block showing the latest blog posts along with the publication date. And finally, just to show you, I'm going to add a category block as well. This will display a list of post categories. This is often used for blog navigation. It is worth mentioning that in the current example I have right now, all of my posts display as uncategorized, so we may need to edit that so we can see how this area works. That's all we need to do for our sidebar.html. This code is going to create a sidebar section. It will have a heading that says learn more, a search box, a list of recent posts with the dates, and a list of categories. And these are all grouped together inside of a div with a custom class of sidebar as well as WP block group so that we can easily hook this with our CSS. I'll save this. And at this point, this doesn't do anything because we haven't called the sidebar to be used anywhere. What we're going to do next is we're going to create a new template file. So I'll come to my template folder, and inside my template file, I'm going to make a new file called single.html. Single.html is what's going to control single post pages. We're going to use a mixture of block-based markup and custom HTML. So let's go ahead and jump into this. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to do something very similar to what we have in index.html, in that I want to have my header and my footer appearing at the top and the bottom of the screen. So we're going to use our WP template part, slug of header, and then we'll go ahead and create a WP template part and change the slug to footer. This will just ensure that we're pulling in our existing header and footer. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to create the main content area. This is going to contain our post content along with the sidebar. In order to do this, we're going to wrap all of this inside of a WP group area. And this particular tag is not self-closing, so we'll go ahead and close the WP group block as well. In addition to having the opening and closing WP block content, I'm also going to pass in a series of key value pairs so I can format this area. We'll begin by going to the opening tag. I'm going to open a set of curly braces, and inside the curly braces, we're going to specify that we want a line, and then we'll set that to full. This is just going to allow us to use full width. Still inside my curly braces, and after full, we're going to set a comma, and then we're going to use the layout key. After the colon, we're going to open a new set of curly braces, and we're going to type constrained. This will allow us to use a constrained layout, meaning the inner content is limited in width. After this, I'm going to use a comma, and then we'll pass in the style key. Style key is going to be followed by curly braces because we want to create some additional parameters for styling. The first one is going to be spacing. After the colon, we'll open a new set of curly braces, and then we're going to go ahead and specify padding. And because we want to target different padding settings, we're going to open another set of curly braces, and inside this set of curly braces, we'll write top. We'll set the value to 2 rems. And then I'm going to use a comma, and we're going to specify bottom. And let's try adding a value of 8 rems. Next, we're going to create a div. We'll create a class of WP block group. This is just creating the container that is going to control this area of our website. I'm also adding an additional class of align full. Inside of this block, I'm going to create an article. We're assigning a class of content wrapper to the article so that it will wrap the main post content using the semantic article tag, and the class of content wrapper will ensure that this area of our page is going to contain styling that we've already established, basically not letting the main width exceed 1200 pixels. Inside of this element, we're going to create a div with a class of main layout. This is a layout wrapper that will hold the post content and the sidebar. Then I'm going to create one more div. We're going to assign a class of post wrap. This is going to contain our post title and our post content. We'll be using some of our WordPress block commenting to do this. I'll create a new comment block, and I'm going to type WP:post-title. This will allow me to dynamically pull in the post title. After the post title, we're going to use WP post content. This is going to go ahead and display the content of the posts. This would be paragraphs, images, lists, whatever was inserted when the post was created. We're also using the layout key and setting inherit to true, which means that it will inherit layout settings from our parent container. After this post wrapper, I'm going to go ahead and pull in my sidebar. So I'll use WP template part and set the slug to sidebar. This will just ensure that we're going to include the sidebar template part. If we go ahead and save this and go back to the front portion of WordPress, and if we refresh our page, it is not showing the top formatting. We're seeing our sidebar, which is great, but we must have some sort of problem with our code. So let's go back and look at the code, and I'm just going to quickly review everything. This is going to seem very insignificant, but it is a worthwhile lesson. I am missing a space between my content and my closing comment tag, and I actually did that twice. So if I add those spaces in and save our single.html page and come back to the front end part and refresh, you're going to see that now the post title, the post content, and our sidebar are showing. It is worth mentioning that the formatting is wonky on the sidebar. It does not look great. We'll resolve this momentarily when we add some CSS. I will open the developer tools and make sure that I'm using my toggle device toolbar so that I can preview my website at a small screen size. At the small screen size, my content doesn't look too bad. I do want to create a little bit of spacing on the right and the left. So we'll go ahead and take care of this first. And then clearly, when my page starts to get larger, we start to run into some issues. So we'll need to add some CSS so that we can control these things as well. Let's go ahead and go into the backend portion of WordPress. We'll go into our CSS. I'm going to add a comment that says post page styles, and then we'll go ahead and add our post page styles. Currently, everything is wrapped inside content wrapper. Let's start off by using that as a hook and preventing this area from getting too wide, as well as adding some padding. And you can see that at the bottom, some of my sidebar is still being cut off by our fixed footer. So let's go back into our CSS. We'll make a selector for content wrapper. I'm going to set the max width to 1200 pixels so this area never gets wider than 1200 pixels. We'll set our margin to 0 for the top, auto for the right and the left, and let's use 10 rems for the bottom. And then finally, I'm going to add some padding. Padding on the top and the bottom can be 0, and we'll add 1 rem of padding to the right and the left. Now you can see at the small screen size, we have a little bit of spacing on the right and the left, and the page looks much better. The next thing that I want to have happen is once my page starts to get wider than 800 pixels, you can see that this search section is also going to go ahead and get that wide. And if we look at this area, you can see this is wrapped inside of a div with a class of sidebar. And now that I'm looking at this, maybe we want to change this to an aside tag, just so it is a little bit more semantic. Let's go back into our code and let's go into sidebar and let's just change this div to an aside. This will ensure that our code is a little bit more semantic. The aside already has a class of sidebar. If we come back to the front end and refresh, you can now see that this bottom-based content is wrapped inside of our aside element. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give this element a maximum width of 800 pixels. We'll go back to our CSS and we'll use our class of sidebar. And I'm just going to set my max width to 800 pixels. Now you might be wondering, why is content wrapper 1200 and this is 800? What I want to have happen is at my mid-screen sizes, I want the sidebar to not get wider than this post content area, but we do want the container that holds both of these things to be at least 1200 pixels at the large screen size so that these elements can appear side by side. And it looks like we need to add some margin auto to this element as well. We'll add 0 to the top and the bottom and auto for the right and the left. Then what we're going to do is we're going to target the main layout, which is the div that wraps around everything. We're going to have this element display as flex. Because I'm designing mobile first, I'm going to use flex wrap of wrap so that these two elements do not sit side by side initially, and I'll just add a gap of 2 rems. This really isn't going to change much on our page at the small screen size. But if my page does get bigger, you can see that eventually these elements are going to appear side by side, which is ultimately what I want. This basically happens at 1200 pixels. So that is when these elements are going to take up the full width. But we do have some extra space that appears along the right. So let's see if we can resolve this until we get to that breakpoint. I'm going to go ahead and I'll come into my CSS and I'm going to make 2 rules. The first one is going to be for the article. Keep in mind that the article has a class assigned to it of main layout. We're going to target main layout, and then we're going to do greater than, and we'll use asterisk colon first child. This is a descendant selector that is going to get anything that is the very first child of main layout. So in this case, it's going to target the article. We're going to use flex shorthand, and we're going to type flex. We're going to set flex shrink and grow both to 0 and the flex basis to 100%. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set my max width also to 100%. We're basically going to do the same thing for the sidebar. So I'll make a new rule. I'm just going to put a comment of sidebar so it's very clear as to what we're talking about. And instead of first child, I'm going to use last child. And we're going to use the exact same values here. Flex shorthand of 0 for flex grow and shrink, 100% for the basis, and max width of 100%. If we go back to the front end portion and refresh, you can now see that the content is centered and it's going to take up the entire space that's available. This looks much better at the mid-screen sizes until we actually want the content to appear in multiple columns. As you can see, this is no longer happening, and that's because we need to adjust our CSS and add a media query so that we can ensure that this is going to occur at a certain point. I'll come back to my CSS. We'll add our media query. I'm going to use @media screen, and in parentheses, I'll use min width. And we'll just set the min width to be 1024 pixels. And then what we're going to do is we're going to target the article and the sidebar once again. And I'll just copy these rules because the code that we're going to use is going to be fairly similar to what we just did. For the article, I'll set the flex shorthand to 0 for shrink and grow, but the flex basis is going to be 60%. and the maximum width is also going to be 60%. For the last child, which is our sidebar, I'm going to simply change 100% to 30%. The reason I'm not using 40% is because we do have some gap and some spacing in between these elements. So if I use 40, they won't appear side by side. But if we save now and we refresh, you can see at the large screen size, we have a 2-column layout, and we have our sidebar, which has links to our other posts along with the date. We have a search bar that users can use, and then we have this category section showing. As I mentioned before, all of my posts are using the same default category of uncategorized. So if I come to categories and create some new categories, I'm just going to do a quick edit and change this to travel. That'll be my default category from now on. I'm going to create a new category for animals, and we'll make one more category for dives. If I go back to my posts and then I quickly just do a quick edit, let's go back to categories. For some reason, uncategorized did not update. So let me just change this to travel. I'll change the slug to travel as well, and we'll update the category. I think I neglected to do that initially. Now when I go back to all posts and I do a quick edit, you can see my default category is travel. That's great. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick edit on this one, and we'll change this to animals. And then on this one right here, I'm going to change this to dives. Now that I've changed the categories, let's go back to the front end. We'll refresh. As you can see, now we have multiple categories that are showing here, and we could use these to navigate to the various pages. There certainly is more styling I could do with the CSS. I would want to change the color of the links, maybe style out my search area, and add some formatting to my headers. But for now, this hopefully shows you how you can make additional template files and how they will automatically target the various pages or post types depending on what the WordPress template hierarchy is. So by default, you have to have index because everything defaults to index. But if you have other template file types, they will override the use of index and apply to pages that use those particular template files.